Tying your brewery's name to a defunct beer from a defunct bar.
Right.
Not necessarily the best, if you're if you're a person who deals in...
I don't know what you're trying to say.
Where are you going with this?
It's all right. You can pull the ripcord if you need to. We can move on.
That's why we have post-editing.
If you're a person who's oh my god, like baseball players are
Playing baseball?
they worry about the socks they wear.
Superstitious.
Yes.
There you go.
Cheers.
You've stumbled on into the Tap Takeover Podcast. Few breweries have taken such a circuitous route to the space they are in today than has Hop Butcher for the World Brewery in Chicago, Illinois. I'm your host, Alex, here with the Tap Takeover Podcast, and we have taken the show on the road again. We'll be talking all things hops in today's podcast with a little Carl Sandburg poetry, some award-winning label art discussion, and the relationship between beer and baseball. Please welcome Jeremiah and Justin to the podcast. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
So let's go around the horn and put some voices with the names. Go ahead and give us your name and your favorite beer style.
I'll start. My name's Justin Miller. I'm the head brewer here at Hop Butcher for the World. And I have to say that my favorite beer style kind of changes with the season. But the one I always go back to and that I've been really digging lately has been barley wine. Nice. Really been digging barley wine.
Nice.
Jeremiah, co-founder of Hop Butcher for the World, and I'm going to go with Session Pales. Anything that's under 5%, fruity, hoppy, crisp, refreshing, I'd sit down with 6 of those. To Justin's point, I also change with the weather. When it gets colder, I like something dark, a little bigger, and everything in between. So
I am Jesus, and I think everybody knows that I like big beers, and I'm the weirdo that likes pumpkin beers.
And I'm Alex again, and my favorite beer style is the IPA, so I think I'm in the right place today.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I'm Jim, and right now I'm into fruited lambics. Just
Nice.
something nice, crisp, and dry.
Jim's the oddball. So Let's get into it. Tell us a little bit about your own beer journeys, your own personal beer journeys. What sort of beers kind of got you excited about the craft industry, at the very beginning?
Three Floyd's Gumball Head. And I feel like there'd be a lot of people out there in this industry that would say something that has something to do with Three Floyd's. That was kind of the aha beer for Jude and I. As with most of us, whether you're from Wisconsin or not, you're drinking some American light lagers at some point in your life, right? And then you decide to try something new that's flavorful. And I'd been drinking a lot of Rolling Rock and Coors Light before that, but Gumball Head seemed like a funny enough name, and it said American wheat, and I always dug some wheat beers coming from Wisconsin and loving on everything New Glarus does. And I tried it, and it blew my mind. And that kind of snowballed into a number of other beer experiences, but that was certainly the one that really turned my beer drinking world on its head.
So for me, it was not Three Floyds. There's actually a funny story about that. My cousin was really into Three Floyds, and I had just turned 21. And he brought me like a mixed 6-pack of Three Floyds that I had in my fridge. And I was at my apartment in college, and we were busting open these Three Floyds bottles. And I was just like, what is this? They all taste the same. And it was my first time really experiencing like extremely, well, I don't want to say extremely now that I know that it wasn't that hoppy. But at the time, it was just roasting my palate. And I'm just like, what is this? Like, this is so weird. Obviously, I don't feel the same way now. I've grown to love hops, and IPA is probably my second favorite style. After that Three Floyds incident, I knew that like there was something there that was like super unique that I wanted to keep trying. So there was a pub right outside one of my classrooms in Chicago, and I would have a night class. So me and my buddies would go to the pub right after. And it's the world famous Miller Pub in Chicago. And they had this Hefeweizen on tap, and it was Weinstefaner Hefeweiss, like the world's oldest brewery, in quotes, And I think they might actually be the world's oldest brewery too. I tried their Hefeweizen. That's when it kind of changed for me. I was like, this is fantastic. I started going to the store, picking up 6-packs of it like weekly. And then, from there it branched out into wit beers, and from wit beers it branched out into pale ales. And then slowly I was growing my palate to sort of be able to sneak through that bitterness, start unlocking the flavor of hops. And ever since then, it's just been a kind of a love story.
It's hard to go back once you go hops.
Yeah.
Yep.
Along with your beer history, tell us a little bit about where you guys are from and how it ended up here.
I grew up in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, so there's some Wisconsin roots there. I went to school in Madison in another life. I went through kind of a business, sports marketing type career. So when I moved down to Chicago in 2005, it was to work with the Chicago Rush arena football team and intern with the Bears, which caused a lot of questions because being from Wisconsin, working for the Bears, still being a Packers fan, I had to answer that question a lot. But they did help me break into sports, in terms of that industry, and still have a lot of love for sports marketing, but obviously caught the beer bug and was homebrewing and turned that into kind of a career in beer, which has surpassed anything that I had kind of dreamt of in the sports marketing world. So mad love for Wisconsin, Madison, Milwaukee, Sheboygan, kind of the trifecta there of all my old stomping grounds. But yeah, I've been here since 2005, so 13 years.
So I was born in Georgia, actually, and I've been living in Illinois since 2001, so most of my life has been in Illinois. That's really all I remember. I went to college. I have a Bachelor's of Science from DePaul University in computer game development. That's something I was super passionate about, super into, and it's still something that I definitely spend some of my free time doing. I don't really make a lot of games anymore because it's very tough work and takes a big team and stuff like that, and it's very time-consuming. I graduated from college. I had been working at this deli that served a lot of craft beer and wine, and I kind of was indulging my passion that way. Started homebrewing once I was out of college. I was looking for a game dev job, and I was probably sending out like 30-plus applications a day. I happened to be at this beer festival, the Barrington Beer Festival, after just trying Juicy from Sean over at the Ram in Schaumburg. And I happened to run into him at the festival, and I thought that it was one of the first like actual New England styles done outside of New England that I really had the chance to try. So I told him that, and we were chatting about it, and I asked him about the ingredients and like some things that I thought could be changed on it and stuff like that. And he was like, wow, he's like, I've never told anyone this before. And he starts telling me the recipe and stuff, and we chat, we go back and forth, and I see him a couple times later at the fest, and we had a couple beers, and we were chatting about like beer and ideas for recipes and stuff like that. And he's like, what are you doing right now? And I'm like, working 2 part-time jobs, trying to find a full-time job for what I went to school for. And he's like, come brew for me. He's like, we need an assistant brewer. So yeah, that's how I got my start. It was kind of the craziest, most unexpected thing. Yeah, here we are now. It's crazy.
So were you homebrewing already at that point?
Yeah, I was, but only for like a year and a half. And I had only like 20 batches under my belt, but I had already been like super into doing like crazy things. There's a guy that I want to give a shout out to named Gino Kenny, who runs Gino's Fine Wine and Spirits in Elgin, that I was homebrewing with. And this guy was obsessed with food concept beers, and he still is. So we were doing a lot of really fun stuff that sort of helped me bridle that creativity for craft brewing and just different kinds of ways you could use ingredients. And that's really what got me here.
So that festival approach seems to work well for Justin, because the first time I met him, when it became pretty evident that Jude and I were excited about moving forward and hiring a brewer and really wanting that person to be the right person, but also just kind of like fit in with the culture that we were trying to establish as much as we could with 2 people, right? As we built that team. And he came up to us at the Oak Park Microbrew review last year and was just kind of geeking out over some of the experimental hops that we had used, but that we continued to explore on. And they just kind of stuck in our brain. When someone can get excited about the same things you get excited about, it makes conversation easy. So I'm not surprised to hear. And that's the first time I've heard the story about how he got the job at the Ram, but it's not a surprise to me at all to hear that that's kind of that was part of his story. So super cool.
Yeah, a little breaking news for Jeremiah today.
And pro tip for any job applicants out there: go and get your potential employers drunk first.
Yes,
and then
talk
about the job.
Target them at a beer festival and go ask for a pour.
Just let your passion run free at the festival.
So the question that we love to ask, since we are the Tap Takeover Podcast, if you can take over the taps of the tap room at the Tap Takeover Podcast, what beers would you bring? How would they tell your story? And Jeremiah already brought a case of beer out, so we're going to actually interweave this throughout the whole episode. So what are we going to start with here?
Right on. So this is Blazed Orange. We wanted you guys to try this because when we rebooted this beer, this is the second time we've brewed it, but it is very different. First time we brewed it with Mandarina, Bavaria, and Citra in a completely different yeast strain. This time it's on our house strain. It's Citra and Simcoe. As the name implies, Blazed Orange. Like, we wanted to taste we wanted it to taste a lot like oranges, right? Citrus part of that hop bill, and we really feel like when we canned this beer, we nailed it, and the response that we've gotten thus far has been super positive enough that we kind of got that inkling that maybe we should bring this back a little bit more frequently than we bring most of our beers back, and we can kind of talk about that strategy too. But the very, very backstory about this beer was when we applied for our self-distro license for Wisconsin, I had the crazy idea that we would brew a beer just for Wisconsin, and I thought Blazed Orange sounded like or Blazed Orange,
that totally fit in.
in a completely respectful way, like coming from there, knowing like that was a big part of like my upbringing and my family and whatnot. And then we very quickly ran into the awesome problem of just not even having enough beer to satisfy some of the local accounts we had established. And that plan to only do a beer for Wisconsin got scrapped, although we did start pushing a little bit of beer over the border into a couple accounts, which was fun, and we plan to build on that. But that was kind of the original concept of how we came up with the name. And this is actually 2 months old right now, so it's still within code. But even though it was one of our older versions of the New England style double, we wanted you to at least try it, because who knows, it might be a month, it might be 6 months before we make it again. But we're really proud of it. Even with 2 months of age on it, we think it's holding up really well. We're proud and excited to share that dissolved oxygen readings that we get when we can are pretty fantastic, so that gives us a little more confidence in terms of putting beer that's not only 2 weeks old, but sometimes 2 months, 2.5 months in front of people like yourself with discerning palates. And you've certainly tried a lot of beer, so we have other beers to show you here, but I wanted to start with this one.
And I will say it's really interesting. Normally these beers fall off really quickly.
Yeah.
We know this about the New England style IPA, and it's what people really go for. It's what's really kind of driving the local markets, because you can't just get a West Coast, an actual beer from the West Coast that's a New England style, or a beer from the East Coast that's a New England style. You can't necessarily get those through a distribution network as fast as you probably need to drink those. And so for this to have held on as well as it has, and it's really coming in nicely. Hazy, you can kind of talk about the taste, but it's got all that orange, like you were talking about. I think the interplay between the hops that you guys chose to use and the malt, the grain, it's pretty exceptional.
Thank you.
Yeah, I got to tip my hat to you guys on this one.
Thank you.
Jesus, what are you getting on the flavor end?
Yeah, the citrus is definitely there, and I'm very curious to taste it fresh, because it would have that, I can imagine that little bit extra, that citrus bite,
It pops really nicely.
Definitely, it doesn't taste like an old beer, and I kind of want to go into the strategy of just canning.
Mm-hmm.
You can everything, right?
Yep.
So...
Even the 10% Imperial Coffee Stout.
And what is the ABV of this one?
6.5.
Yep, 6.5. So
I was going to say it seems really low, but that's kind of scary.
We're typically playing between 5 3/4 and 7.5. So most of our we're at the lower end of what one would consider a double IPA. In fact, I think that some of our favorite accounts are like, I'm not calling that a double, it's a 7.5. And I'm like, if you look at BJCP, 7.5 is a double. So it's more like we played around with that ABV range quite a bit. We were at 8 for a while. We tried 6, 6.5, 7, and we really liked the range that we ended up in. So you'll see us sometimes do like a 6.5 in the style. You'll see us do 7.5. We'll pop up to 8 here and then. It all kind of depends on the ingredients, the beer, really what we're going for. So.
Yeah, for me, it's super smooth. Still getting a lot of, I want to say tangerine is why I'm getting that orange grapefruit from the like the Simcoe and
Citra.
To talk about 60 days for being really old, I mean, we're talking like this is a 3-year-old, aged stout. It's still coming across great, though.
Thank you. It's a dangerous path when you get into talking about how 2 months is really old for any style of beer.
Yeah.
I mean, there's anything that you're wanting to exhibit fresh hop flavor and aroma, and you want as fresh as possible, right? Which is part of the reason that we hold on so tightly to our self-distro rights, both in Illinois and Wisconsin. And as we look to grow beyond that, we're going to have to find the right third-party distributor partners that believe in the same strategy of freshness and hold the accounts accountable for how long they let it sit on their shelf. There are some distributors out there that I think would be as anal retentive as we are about really throttling how many cases they buy and try to sell, because we want them to move through it. And maybe I'm jumping ahead here, but part of the exciting part about us tripling our capacity was that we aren't just max capacity. Justin's not canning out of a fermenter and then filling it the next day. Maybe a couple times in the year, but like we essentially built our production schedule so that we can kick out 4 unique beers a month, but that we're separating it by 2 weeks, so that we give our accounts 2 weeks to move through whatever we pushed out, and then we can hit them with another fresh drop of 2 different beers. And we really like that strategy because it plays well with the styles we're putting out there, right? So how many cases do you think you could sell through in 2 weeks? And I feel like with most breweries, and God bless flagships, like I have all the respect in the world for flagships, even though we don't have one. Sometimes you find an account that grabs on to a specific brand, and then it's like, give me 40 cases, or give me 20, and it might take them a while to work through that, and that works too. It didn't seem like that's who we were. So we're trying to find that sweet spot, and it's different for every account. How many can you move through until we can hit you with 2 different ones?
Yeah, because there can be micro localization where certain region, city just doesn't like IPAs. They're maybe more a malt forward population for whatever reason. They love Oktoberfest. They love barley wines that are just big malt bombs, and they don't drink IPAs.
Right.
So how do you manage all that without a distributor that's really going to take care of you?
I think most buyers are in touch with their market and their customers, so that I don't know that we've ever encountered a buyer who's like, give me 10 cases, knowing he could only sell through 2. So I think typically it's the other way, right? They play it safe at first, like before, maybe when we add them, before we do, they're like, give us 1 or 2 cases, and then we drop 1 or 2, and then they sell through it, and then the next time we ask, maybe it's 3 or 4, and we try to organically grow that so that we're not just starting at 20 and then working back. So we try to be mindful of that, and it maybe is unconventional in the sense that any account that sells through something is going to say, give me more, right? Like, give me as much as I could possibly sell. But I don't think every brewery out there is releasing 4 unique beers a month, or really churning through as many new beers as we are, and plan to continue doing. For whatever small segment of that is unique to us, that gets us excited about doing what we do, because there's just so many ideas, so many hop combinations, so many beer names, so many ingredients out there that we haven't even got to yet, and I can't imagine making the same beer over and over and over again and never getting to those ingredients. And again, that kind of ties back to what how we met Justin. How many people are you going to talk to that are going to geek out over a hop that doesn't even have a name yet, right?
Exactly.
Was that HBC 655?
Yeah,
that stuff's awesome, dude.
HBC 472 is the one that we were geeking out about, and that's the one that we use in our Imperial Coffee Stout. And for a couple reasons, it's why we use what we use, and it also keeps the sourcing part of our jobs interesting, right? Because you can't contract experimental hops, so you really have to jump on them when you find them, and then manage how you use them depending on how many times you want to use that beer. So it keeps our jobs interesting.
And I think the plethora of ingredients that you guys use really contribute well to the business model that you've chosen. I mean, if you want to talk about a brewery that makes a lot of different beers, look no further than Hop Butcher for the World, because you guys, your catalog is it's so extensive. Just scrolling through it on your website is pretty impressive. Just seeing all the different one-offs, and like you said, you guys don't really carry a flagship beer, but. Yeah, let's get back into the beers here. It looks like you have another one for us in order to tell your tale through this tap takeover.
So this is Mellotron. Like Blazed Orange, this is the second time we've brewed this beer. Like Blazed Orange, this is a reboot of the entire beer, so different yeast strain. Back when we brewed it the first time, it was very much... we were still playing around with what we wanted some of these beers to be, and we went back to our house strain, having fallen in love with that strain, London 3, and really knowing how to manipulate that, where it's going to start, where it's going to stop, how it's going to taste, and really letting the hops or the hop combination drive the ship.
Yeah, what is the hop combination in this one?
This one's Ozaka, Motueka, and Simcoe.
Nice.
The first time we did it, it was just Ozaka. Right, so we like those hops. We like the opportunity to use single hop approaches with beers, but sometimes, depending on the oil content and various other parts of what makes up a hop, they can play off each other quite nicely and result in something way more flavorful or aromatic than maybe what we thought we could get out of just one hop. So this felt like the right move, and it's not worldly different than Blazed Orange, except for the hop combination as far as the recipe is concerned. But the way I envision this beer is kind of the tropical to the blazed orange citrus. And then we brewed it and we got to taste it and smell it, and fruit punch notes were coming out. And then I was trying to change the descriptors on the can, and I was talking to Justin because we were just getting him on board at that point, and we were dumping all the dry hops in, and it was like, this is tropical. It's not the most like punch you in the face tropical as maybe you'd get out of Galaxy Bowl or even the Jewels, but we really felt like it was a cool interplay of the Azacca and Motueka and being propped up with a little bit of Simcoe.
Then I want to say is that this beer right here is kind of an example of why I'm so excited to be a part of this team, because most New England styles, it's kind of accepted that you need to have some sort of like fruit or tropical fruit component in your beer, right? And this beer has both, but it also has this Azacca component that is super unique. Like there's an interesting like almost pine needle grassiness in the back end that you don't normally taste in a beer like this. And I think that that's part of like what we're trying to do is like push what you can do in this style in terms of like which hops can be acceptable, which hops can't. People might say you can't put that hop in a New England style IPA. Well, I think that that's kind of our mission statement, is to say why not?
Watch us.
Right. I mean, the whole basis of New England style IPA was that it broke so many boundaries, and now people are just like, if we can do it with that, let's just take that style that broke boundaries and break boundaries with that as well.
Right. Yeah, and that plays into the combinations, it plays into the experimentals, it plays into our constant change, right? It's all about trying new things. And you know what? There are a lot of breweries out there that maybe stick with Citra, Mosaic, Galaxy, Nelson, and we do play a lot with what we call those the sexy hops, or some people call them the easy button, where you just throw Citra in it and it's delicious. But we like to take risks, and we play within something that we think will be delicious. We're not just throwing, a pickle at a wall and seeing what happens, but we're playing within what we know will work by
You better write that down.
Right? Sounds like a good name for a beer, yeah. Pickle at a wall beer.
But we're switching stuff up, and you know what? Like the first two beers we've tried here, Blazed Orange and Mellotron, we tried something different, and we felt it could be better, and the next time we came around to those beers, we did what we thought would make it a better beer.
Yeah, for me, this is really interesting because it does have some of those nuances of a West Coast, the pine dank, with that kind of passion fruit, mango, tropical flavors, and is definitely different.
We like to ride the fence, for lack of a better term, on this style, right? It's close enough to New England style to some of the things that Treehouse and Trillium and Monkish and all of those guys are doing, but we do like a little bit more balance than I think you would find in those beers. So even locally, there are breweries that are making top-notch New England style doubles that, if you were to put them up against our beers, they might be a little sweeter, less balanced, less bitter, and those are delicious too. I think you find 2 or 3, maybe even 4 different kinds of beer drinkers within the style of New England style. Some that like it as sweet as possible, some that like it a little more bitter, some that like it in between. But we like having a little bit of that. I think we termed it at one point like a boomerang flavor and bitterness, where like you get the softness of the water, you get the juiciness, but you also get enough balance in there that you could drink a couple of these and not feel like you just drank a sugar bomb. If you scroll through our Untapped check-ins, like you might see some people, say, "Oh gosh, bitter," or "Oh, it's too sweet," and it's entertaining to roll through what people think on Untapped, because you can find two 4.5 out of 5 star check-ins that acknowledge the quality of the beer and say completely opposite things about what they might prefer, or like a 3.5 and then a 5, and it's like juice bomb, delicious, and then too bitter, and you really kind of have to develop a numbness to that, where you read it, you acknowledge it, you appreciate someone's feedback, but you also acknowledge that there are so many subjective tastes as it comes to beer. What tastes like a 5 out of 5 to one person might be a 3.5 or a 2.5 to somebody else. But thankfully, we've found our groove making beers, and with hop combinations and ingredients that we love to drink, that a large enough amount of people out there enjoy drinking enough that our beers tend to move quickly, which is always fun to see.
And that's one of the fun things about being in the craft beer industry, is opposed to the macro beer industry, right? With macro, you're kind of shooting for the lowest common denominator. What is the most amount of people going to like in any given beer? And then you just produce the shit out of it. Yep. With what you guys are doing, it's a little more fun. You guys are able to experiment more with the hops, experiment more with the malts. I guess the question is, what are the challenges as far as bringing out some of the best flavors in those hops? Is it about using a different malt? Is it about using different hops with different hops? What have you found is the most effective way to get the flavor profiles that you guys are looking for?
So as with any new style, I think that there requires a bit of dialing in, right? And every brewer could list off a couple examples where they would have done something differently in retrospect. We certainly played around with the style enough to really do two things. One, make the most delicious version of that style we could, but two, kind of find an approach of that is unique to us, right? Where people take a swig of a can, whether it's blind tasting or not, and they let that burp out, and they're like, that's that Hop Butcher burp. Like that's the flavor that there's some common denominators here of this beer that feel like a Hop Butcher beer. We certainly tweak our grain bills quite a bit over the years. I think with this style right now, we've kind of settled in a general parameter where we're really letting the hops shine and kind of make the difference, say between Blazed Orange and the Jewels. Let the hops tell the difference and show us that too. Like, this is what Vic Secret and Mosaic taste like versus Citra and Simcoe on essentially the same grain bill. When we start jumping to other beers like our clean American, our clear beers, right? The more traditional IPAs like Your Wish is Granted, you'll still find similar styles in that you can find some common denominators, but you're also going to notice some other differences. And I could tell you those differences. Base grains are different. We're using different specialties. We're maybe using a blend of a base grain instead of just straight two-row, straight pale, straight pills. And I think we've found a level of excitement with a blend between two-row and pills and certain other adjuncts, flaked oats, flake barley, oat malt, wheat, heavy in wheat. And some of that plays back to my upbringing as far as like drinking New Glarus beers and German wheats like Justin was talking about. But we really found some ingredients we fell in love with. And one of them specifically, which is a little bit more expensive but worth every penny. With any small brewer, you kind of put some product out there that might be a couple bucks more expensive than a pack of Miller Lite or Coors Light or whatever, and you kind of tell that story and say, hey, we're using local ingredients, we're using expensive hops, that's why the price is a little bit higher. And we felt as producers that we should look the other way as well, right? We shouldn't be buying the cheapest malts that are delicious. We should buy the bombest white wheat malt we can find. And one of those, there's a maltster out in Colorado called Troubadour that works with a local farmer out there. It's called Antero White Wheat. And it is a little bit more expensive, but when we started using that, we noticed a discernible difference in the quality of that fruity but creamy wheat character. And now we order that stuff by the pallet. And it's in almost every beer we do, even the non-hazy type beers.
You're taking us on quite a little journey here. We started out with the Blaze Orange, then the Mellotron.
Yep.
And you did mention that Blaze Orange was the one that was the oldest one here. But now we're going to move on to your freshest.
Yeah, so the Mellotron is a tad bit newer than Blazed Oranges, but the Jewels was actually canned last week. So this run was April 4th.
Yeah.
All right, so 10 days ago.
And then the next beer is going to be directly out of the bright tank.
Yep.
Because that's how we really only drink our IPAs here.
I walked back there to grab Justin, and he was pulling a picture of something that's getting canned on Tuesday and Wednesday because he wanted you guys to try it. And I was like, I don't know, man. I got 6 beers in this box. These guys got to drive home to Milwaukee.
Only one of us has to drive home.
Right. So we'll whether it's on the podcast or not, we'll let you try what's getting ready to go. But freshness is paramount to what we do. Part of it because of the styles or style that we play in pretty heavily. The other part was that being self-distributors, there are several benefits to that. One, or our favorite, being the fact that like when we make deliveries, like you get a chance to meet the people buying your beer, and I mean like the customers in the stores that are buying the beer from us, because that's really cool. We try to go out of our way to be approachable and talk with everyone on social media, and when we're making these beer drops, They're like, hey, did you drop at Binny's in Elmwood Park yet? Did you drop at Schaumburg? And we're having that conversation with them very gratefully, thinking like, hey, if you guys are willing to chase our beer down and spend your hard-earned money on our beer, like the least we can do is help you find it. And if you geek out over beer that's still cold and it never touched a refrigerator, like it's cold coming from the fermenter, because we unitank everything, coming from the fermenter into a canning machine and sealed and slapped into a 4-pack, dropped in a case, and then loaded into a car.
Guilty as charged.
Yeah, I mean, I geek out about that when I see people posting pictures or untapped check-ins, and they're like, "This is still cold from canning day. Like, how cool is it? This this beer was canned 3 hours ago." And we didn't know how that was going to go going into it, but after we did it a couple times and we saw how excited people got, like we got excited about it, and our accounts love it, and so it was just something that it felt important that we continue.
Tell us a little bit about this specific.
Yeah, so the Jewels is Mosaic and Vic Secret Double IPA. So again, maybe some slight tweaks off of our grain bill or our grist that we used with the previous two beers, but really just two sexy, exciting hops. Mosaic, I mean, it's hard to go wrong with a hop like Mosaic. It's one of my favorites. And Vic Secret, which this is the first time we've used Vic Secret. To us, we interpreted after a rub and kind of doing a little reading online about the hop that it's very much like it's similar to Galaxy. I don't like calling it Galaxy Light, but it is maybe a touch lighter on those passion fruits, but they're still very much there. So we've been wanting to use the hop for a while. We got our hands on some, and we thought, what better hop to pair it with than Mosaic? And the feedback to this beer has been phenomenal. Kind of made us feel bad that we only kicked out 30 barrels of it. So I think we're going to have to brew it again soon.
Yeah, so not to give away any state secrets here, but how do you source some of your more rare hops?
Yeah, well, I spend a lot of time asking questions and sending emails and calling people. Okay. Honestly.
So are you the guy like following the hop truck around?
No, it's a lot of emailing and calling. We have some really awesome relationships with some really awesome suppliers, right? And sometimes we get to interact with the farmers themselves, but when you get to know, some of the people that sell hops or that sell malt, they're just as excited about beer as we are. So you get to know them. It's good to pick up the phone every now and then. It's good to check in on a random Tuesday just because and say, hey, I know this is crazy, but do you guys have any Galaxy? Do you have any Nelson? And you'd be surprised sometimes they say yes. The hop market is kind of a game, right? Like they have to hold on to what's been promised. But if that brewer just decides that they can't use all of it, they got to sell it. And people like us, like Jude and I and Justin, like we have to have a portion of our buying habits be a little bit hoarder-esque. Because when you find it, you gotta jump on it, and you gotta be prepared to drop some money on as much as it takes to get it.
Like we are here on the podcast, as well as many of our listeners, is there a white whale of a hop that you haven't been able to get your hands on yet, but you really want to brew with?
It's been funny because I feel like that's changed a little bit. I feel like it's been Nelson Sauvin for maybe the last 5 years. And just this past year, we were able to not only buy some on spot, but secure a small contract of it. And now, for the life of me, over and above what we have contracted, I can't get Galaxy. And you look at some of the spot markets, and it's like $30 a pound, which is insane. So there's a limit to what we're willing to pay for certain hops. And like I said, we do have some available to us. But with a beer like Galaxy Bowl, which, with all due respects to our other beers, it really kind of put us on the map and like caused people to start paying more attention to our beers. That beer is 100% Galaxy hops, and we use a ton of them on a 30-barrel batch. So knowing that there's a limit to our Galaxy contracts, we have to be mindful of not making that beer too frequently, because then we're just out. And then at that point, we're at the mercy of the spot market. And every brewer, I think, out there is clamoring for more and more Galaxy because it's the bangingest hop, for lack of a better term. Additionally, you asked if there was a white whale. There are a few out there that are non-experimentals, right? So I'm constantly chasing experimentals that sound delicious, and we'll always find a way to use them. Last year, when all the South African hops were commandeered, for lack of a better term, I was able to find a back channel to still get some. So one of the beers that we're set to brew up on the next round here, or no, we brewed them today. We brewed them this week.
I brewed them 2 days ago.
Uses is Southern Passion, which is a South African hop, and those are super exciting to us. So it's not a single hop beer. It's paired with some other really awesome hops, but those have always been, at least for the last couple of years, fun to chase. There's a new one out of Australia, out of a specific farm that I'm not going to name for fear of competition. But we anticipated getting some of this hop either late this month or early next, and we were going to reboot one of the return beers to feature that hop. And then we found out earlier this week that another hop that we contract from that farm, that contract, at least for this year, got canceled because the farm had like a devastating fire. So everybody's okay, which is important, which is the most important thing. Like, we can do without our hops and make other plans, like, but that has kind of put in jeopardy our ability to get this hop. But if you can imagine some of the hops that you've already tasted, that we've already kind of named, it's in that vicinity of things. And I'm still crossing my fingers that they can do that hop, but we'll see. I emailed the farmer today, so.
All right.
And we have like 11 pounds of it, right?
We got none of it right now. It's completely. We would be the first brewery in the States to use that hop if they can send it to us. So,
breaking news.
I know, right? Hot takes.
All right.
Hot take.
For me, I've been wanting to use, ever since Denali became named, I've wanted to use it. Because I tried this beer from Crystal Lake Brewing. They had a smash beer that was Denali and just two-row pale malt. I remember thinking, wow, this is the most intense pineapple I've ever tasted in a beer. A lot of breweries like to mention pineapple on their tasting notes, but that beer was straight up fresh, ripe pineapple. So for me, Denali, that's been stuck in my head, and I've been wanting to brew with it. And he mentioned Southern Passion. We're actually in the same beer. We're kind of knocking both of those white whales out. It's going to have Denali, Citra, and Southern Passion in it, so we're really excited about that one. It's coming soon.
He asked me if we had ever used Denali, or if we had access to it, because he was excited about what that hop brings. I was like, you know what? We have a contract on that, actually. And we've used it once before, but we didn't necessarily use it to feature the pineapple. So I'm excited to see, how our different use of that changes what's perceived in that hop. But that's, like he said, it's Denali, Citra, and Southern Passion.
Mm-hmm.
It's our reboot of a beer called Smoke-Filled Room. So that got brewed this week, and we can let you try it. It's not that far along, but we'll let you try it and see what you think.
I tried it the other day, and I have to say that the first thing I noticed in that beer is pineapple. So I'm really excited.
So all the Denali's coming through. That's awesome.
Yes.
No, that brings up I think an interesting point. I know you probably take a break here in a minute, but like, I just can't stop talking, and he's making faces at me, and we got puppies in the tap room. One of the things that we started thinking about is that right now we brew at Miskatonic, who have been gracious hosts, and thank you to them for kind of allowing us in their home, but we don't have a tap room. Right, so that's a common question we get is, do you guys have a brewery? Yeah, sort of. It's not our brewery, but we have a place to brew. Do you have a tap room? No. But you should come to Miskatonic because their beers are dialed in, as crazy and delicious. But we started thinking about all of our beers in a lineup, right? Like when we have 6 taps at our own tap room, or we have 12 taps, like we don't want everything to taste the same, right? So that plays into our strategy of just trying a bunch of combinations and switching this up and that up. So when we are shooting to use Denali, and I hear Justin talking about, we really want some banging pineapple in this. And then I'm talking to you guys about blazed orange, and it's like, we really want that one to bang orange and citrus, and that one should be light tropical, and this one over here should be just dank, and So we're trying to also visualize what this is going to look like when we have more than a handful of beers to put in front of one person at one time, right? All enveloped into our own tap room. And that kind of speaks to like where we came from too, because we started with one 15-barrel tank at another brewery, and it was like one beer a month, and now we're at 6 tanks, and we're doing 4 different beers a month. So we're still maintaining that new churn of different ideas and hops, but we're still keeping in mind that when we're able to get in front of somebody and present what Hop Butcher stands for, give them a bunch of options, we want to make sure that we're highlighting those ingredients, those fruits, those hops, those malts, and we're showing range. And which is funny to say from a brewer that's like mostly hoppy beers, right? But like there are so many flavors that you can derive from hops without even using fruit. And then when you start, you're talking about fruit lambics, right? Like you start tossing fruit into the mix, and you can completely spin all of that on its head. We have We have 2 of our darker beers here to try as well, which obviously exhibit different flavors as well. But like you'll find us with maybe 2 or 3 dark beers in our lineup, and we're excited to change that. Justin also brewed a dark beer, which we'll keep a lid on until we have beer in cans. But I think everyone will be really excited about that as well. And again, just trying to convey like Justin's talents in the brew house and what we can do so that if you don't like hoppy beers, we have options for you. So
I think it's pretty cool to be able to take one style and just take it to its furthest possible extremes, in all directions. The way that you guys are going.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that now more than ever, we're really trying to just really live up to our name. We're trying to serve up quite a variety of different flavors and profiles with hops. So
yeah, and I think it's a perfect time to take a little break. But we're going to come back and we're going to talk about that name, how you guys got the name Hop Butcher. We're going to continue this tap takeover. We got a few more beers on tap.
All right, we are back. So let's keep it rolling here. What's the next beer, Jeremiah?
Your wish is granted. This is a beer that we've been brewing for a while, since even before we took a hard dive into the New England style. It is a double IPA, but it's brewed clean and is brewed with Citra and Nelson Sauvin. So it was meant to allow those 2 hops, Citra or citrus side of things, to interact with the white wine element of Nelson and just be something super delicious and refreshing to drink. It's not overly bitter. You might call it West Coast. You may not. You may just call it an IPA. The feedback on this one, the first, second, and third time that we brewed it, was enough that when we start talking about beers that we want to put in that lineup when we have a tap room, beer that we would potentially brew a lot of and distribute, this is always part of that conversation.
Speaking of tap room, you don't have one yet, obviously, you said, but you're here. Can you tell us a little bit about the partnership here?
Yeah, so the Miskatonic guys are 2 of our, 4 really, 4 or 5 of our really best new friends, right? The short version of this story is that our previous situation was kind of falling apart, and we didn't know what we were going to do. We thought we might be out of the market for a year as we tried to finance and get our own brewery open, and we still want to do that. We still want our own brewery. But we were actually pouring at Sierra Nevada Beer Camp down at Navy Pier. Josh from Miskatonic came up to Jude and I, we were pouring, and kind of said, "Hey, are you guys interested? We can move some things around at our place and allow you to use 2 of our tanks to kind of rent them from us." And man, I can't emphasize how perfect that timing was. And it took us a couple months. We were out of the market because we had to situate our licenses and make sure that things were buttoned up. But it really allowed us to kind of maintain the momentum we had started over at the previous brewery and really take this to the next level. Because then that conversation was had of, hey, we really appreciate you letting us use those 2 tanks, but long term, do you have plans to put more tanks in your brewery, knowing what kind of space they had here? And they ended up allowing us to put 4 more tanks of our own into their brewery. So we went from one 15-barrel tank to some periodic usage of a 30 or a 15 at the previous, to 2 30s at Miskatonic, to 6 30s at Miskatonic, which allowed us to really stomp on the gas pedal and see what we could do. So they've been amazing friends and amazing partners. They've been super supportive. Their beer's delicious, and as I said before, we're super dialed in. So we like drinking their beers. They like drinking our beers. And it's really fun to learn from each other because they obviously have a ton of knowledge about running a brewery and a tap room that we don't. But we make different beers in different styles, so they can learn kind of about what we do in our process as we learn about what they do on their system and in their house.
Well, getting back to your wishes granted, it's a double IPA, but I think it's very approachable. Now, you have a strategy about that, right? You're making the big beers for the nerds. Tell us a little bit about that.
First of all, I want to be super clear that we use the term nerd very respectfully.
Oh, like us.
We're nerds ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, we nerd out about all sorts of things.
We self-identify as nerds.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you're in good company here.
So we want to keep it interesting, right? Because we don't want to get bored with what we're brewing, which is, that plays into all the different combinations of this and that we use. But we want to make a beer or beers that are interesting enough for hardcore beer fans and also approachable enough for people who are maybe new to craft beer, because there's a lot of talk about craft beer bubble this, bubble that. Breweries are opening all over the place. But truth is that when you compare brewery growth to wine growth, like no one's talking about there being too many wineries. There are a lot of consumers out there right now that are still drinking American light lagers, mass-produced Bud Lights, Coors Lights, Miller Lights, and that's fine. But I think similar to the conversation we had earlier about those aha moments, when you put something in front of them that maybe tastes like the Jewels or Your Wishes Granted, and they're used to tasting, a light lager, I think chances are, a light bulb's going to go off, and they're going to want to explore other beers that are even not Hop Butcher beers. But if we can make a beer that, they can turn that can around. We have tasting notes all over the back of our can here that try to convey what they're going to get out of this beer if they buy that 4-pack. And we feel that that's helped, because sometimes you look at a Zakamotueka, Simcoe, like a casual beer buyer maybe doesn't know what the heck those hops mean. That's complete foreign language to them. But if you turn around and you see, bright citrus, tropical fruit, or, live, what do we write? Fruit punch. Like that one tastes like fruit punch to me. That sounds good to people who maybe haven't had those, those flavors or aromatics in a beer. So really, like, we found our niche by riding that line in between interesting and approachable, and we try to be that on social media, interacting with people who are buying our beers too. Like I think I said this before, but the least we can do is help you find where to buy our beer as we're distributing it, if you're willing to spend your hard-earned money on our beer. Like, we appreciate the heck out of that.
I'm really enjoying Your Wishes Granted. This is really a throwback to the big IPAs that really got me into drinking these big hop beers, and it's kind of like a throwback to my youth. But I want to get into a little bit about the origin of your current name. So you were originally called something else.
Yep. South Loop Brewing Company.
All right, and before becoming a Hop Butcher for the world.
Yep.
Where does that name come from?
South Loop or Hop Butcher?
Oh, both.
So my wife and I lived in the South Loop, and at the conception of this idea, South Loop didn't have any other breweries, and we were really passionate about the neighborhood we lived in, and we wanted to be very Chicago-centric. And so we kicked it off like that, right? We kicked it off brewing, although I think I kicked it off even before we were licensed, so it was kind of a social media-only presence, like, hey, we're a brewery in planning. And then as we got going, we started gaining some traction with a couple of the beers that we were brewing. We started to try and grow up the business a little bit and get more serious, and one of those things involved trademarking the name. Let's own it. Let's not run into those situations, because the growth of the craft beer industry at that time was such that there were breweries that were having to change their name. You saw brewery infighting about names of beers, and it was like, spending the money on protecting your brand or your beer names at that point felt like the right thing to do. And we tried to take that step and found out very quickly that there was a bar that no longer exists, which is the icing on the cake. The bar that no longer exists had a house beer that was labeled South Loop Lager. And the USPTO that manages, patents and trademarks doesn't care whether it's a bar or a beer or a brewery. The fact that it started with South Loop and it was in the beer category meant that we couldn't file for a trademark on South Loop Brewing Company.
Wow.
Right? So
could you even go to that defunct bar and try and buy it from them?
We could. And I approached them. They were kind of unresponsive, but they weren't coming at us. They weren't like, we're going to sue you if you don't stop. They were super cool. So I can't talk smack about them, even though they're not open anymore. But what the decision that Jude and I made at that point was, even though we felt like we had put a lot of time, money, and effort into the name South Loop, it was probably the right moment. Like, if we were serious about taking this brewery to the next step and really trying to make a career out of it and amp production and have a bigger presence, it was probably the responsible grown-up thing to do to, take the lump, make the change, and try to maintain momentum that way, rather than get, 2, 3, 4 years down the line, you're paying thousands of dollars to put a sign on your wall, and then whoops, someone's mad and upset that you used their mark. And the way Hop Butcher came about, obviously sticking within that Chicago-centric piece, like you hear Windy City a lot, and to us that had been used in beers as well as brewery names. Like, we wanted something that spoke true Chicago, but gritty Chicago, but was super unique, but also that resonated with people outside of the market, right? So that kind of tied back to what happens when we go into Milwaukee. And we distribute beer there. Does anyone going to care what the South Loop is or what it means?
No,
Maybe not.
If anything,
Probably not,
People
right?
won't buy it.
Right.
Because
Well, plus you're tying your brewery's name to a defunct beer from a defunct bar.
Right.
If you're a superstitious person, that might not be the best way to go. A defunct beer made by a defunct brewery and tying your name to that. So you guys went completely the opposite direction and had a little poetry involved as well.
Yeah, so everybody knows the city of Broad Shoulders part of that Carl Sandburg Chicago poem. And in my pursuit of looking for something that dripped Chicago, Carl Sandburg wasn't the only poet that I was reading and really digging into. That was one that I felt was a popular one and really spoke to me about what it's like to live in Chicago, what people feel about Chicago as a whole. And I wrote this down in my book of ideas. And the honest, candid answer is that Hop Butcher for the World was actually pegged to be a beer name. We had brewed a hoppy double called Hop Monster the Midway that we didn't put in cans or bottles, like we just put it in kegs, and it went over really well. And I wanted to rebrew this beer, but didn't want to get a cease and desist letter from the Bears. And so I had been eyeing Hop Butcher for the World as the second name for that beer, and I just I kept looking at it, right? And then all the stuff that I already described with South Loop Brewing Company, all that stuff was kind of happening at the same time. And I called Jude one day and was like, hey, I got a crazy idea, because it's not a traditional format for a brew. It's not like X and X Brewing Company or X and X Brewing. It's just Hop Butcher for the World. It seemed to hit all of those points that concerned me about growing a brewery from small to large or small to medium, whatever we end up being. It's like we can trademark this because it's available. It speaks to the type of beers we like and brew. And you know what? When we try to go into Milwaukee or Madison or Indiana or Southwest Michigan or wherever we end up going with our beers, we feel like people would look at Hop Butcher for the World and maybe think, I like hoppy beers, like that's a pretty cool name, maybe I'll give them a shot. In the same way, full circle here, that I looked at Gumball Head and was like, that's a funny name for a beer, that's an American wheat, I kind of like wheat beers, like I'll try it. And we felt like, you know what, we can make beer that tastes this good, right? That's as approachable and interesting, that if we could just get someone to give us a shot and crack that can open and drink it, that from there we could build something that that made them want to come back for more, or that made them respect us or like us. So mad love for Carl Sandburg and how he described Chicago. I think that if you were to, and I didn't specify, he doesn't actually say hop butcher, he says hog butcher, right? So that's important to the part of the story. Obviously, we're not brewing pigs, but
God.
hop was close enough to hog that we felt we could make that switch and people would think it was interesting and enjoyable and kind of like get a good chuckle. Like, and there are some people that check in our beers on Beer Advocate or Untapped or wherever, and they're like, weird name for a brewery. But for everyone that says that, there are probably 25, 30 people that are like, that's a cool name for a brewery, and that makes us feel good.
Just a couple days ago in the tap room, I was brewing, and I happened to walk by to grab some water in the bar, and someone stopped me and said, they were kind of like quizzing me, like, do you know where your name comes from? And I'm like, Sandburg. And they're like, okay, good. And she really resonated with it because I guess she reads a lot of poems and stuff like that, and might be a literary major or something like that, and she was super excited about the name and all of the roots, Chicago roots and stuff like that. So
it's good to know that you guys have a Carl Sandburg selected poems book in the brewery too, so that you guys can pull that out and show people the passage as well.
We didn't bring that here.
No.
That's a purely Miskatonic thing, and it kind of sits alone on the shelf there as like a very unique piece, because the rest of the stuff they have there is just crazy fantasy and like thrillers and H.P. Lovecraftian, very unique stories to blow your mind.
I'm actually going to have to ask them if they bought, like when we agreed to come brew here and accepted their offer, if they maybe put this on the shelf out of superstition.
Oh, good.
Yeah, you brought up superstition. Maybe that's why this is here.
I thought that was your work. Interesting.
We're gonna have to.
I'm gonna dig into this and get back to you later.
If we ever go somewhere else, or when we do open our own place, we're gonna have to buy a copy of this.
Yeah, like one of those keep the glass offers, like buy a beer, keep the glass, get a book by Carl Sandburg and all of his poems.
What I'm also hearing is that we're not going to be seeing a beer called The Bears Still Suck anytime soon.
No.
Because it'll go over well in Wisconsin, I'm just saying. FYI.
There's the Wisconsin only beer right there.
So this next beer that I just poured for you guys actually exhibits our tie to sports, right? I think one of the things that drove us in terms of this beer but also kind of how we develop recipes, and we talked a little bit about approachability and whatnot, was that how do we bridge what people do and are passionate about with our beers? And one of the things that I think Chicagoans and Milwaukeeans and really anyone who gets into their civic pride, sports plays a big part in a lot of people's in their lives. And Chicago sports fans love their White Sox, or they love their Cubs, or they love their Bears, or Blackhawks, or whatnot. So we try to take our passion for those Chicago sports and tie them back to our beer. And this was actually the first beer we ever brewed on a license. So we got a license. We brewed Good Rye's We're Black. And my intent with the beer was pretty clear from the get-go. Our intent, Jude and I do this together, was to have it in, at the time it was U.S. Cellular Field where the White Sox play. But I didn't know that they had set their beer plan like months and months prior to the season starting. So we released this beer and they were like, cool idea, but our beer program is set for the season, but let's keep in touch for next year. So we pushed it out. It's a really awesome, like, hoppy example of a black rye IPA, which maybe someone loves that style, maybe they don't, right? But
again, it's
speaks
playing,
to us.
It's playing with those beer styles within the beer style,
Yeah.
right? You could take a regular black IPA, but you guys went a little rye with it,
Right, right.
Also, I love the label art on this one. So that is, it looks like the Black Sox.
Yep.
So you got a little White
Little
Sox,
ode.
Black Sox scandal.
There's an ode there. It went over really well to the accounts that we pushed it out that weren't U.S. Cellular, right? And then we kept in touch and met with them the following year when they were doing their beer program. They're like, well, we got to have Good Ryes. And that year, we were maybe like one of 12 breweries that served craft beer at the Cell. And it went over really well. It was really cool to see people checking in and taking pictures, like in front of, with the game and field in the background. And this is the third year of us being at now it's the Guaranteed Rate Field, but we're in the Craft Cave as well as the club level. Again, it's exciting enough that baseball season is here. And then we kind of frosting on the cake that thing by being able to watch people drink our beer while they're at the stadium.
Yeah, this is my newest favorite, Cascadian Dark.
Thank you.
This is awesome. And it's not like a super high ABV, which some can get, and it just overpowers all the flavors. The malt that I get out of this and the rye is fantastic. It's a great grain flavor, and you meld it with the hops really fantastically. This is an eye-opener for me right now.
Thank you. So this is a great example of us using a bunch of ingredients that we're excited about, right? And it is probably the fifth or sixth time we've been able to brew this, the third time we've released it. That makes sense because we brewed it multiple times for the White Sox. So we've had time to dial it in. We've had time to adjust our rye. Maybe the first batch of this, the rye was a little, like, it was there, right? We were like, maybe if we dial it back a little bit, you'll taste that Citra more.
Yeah.
And I think that the Cascade brings the grapefruit, the Citra brings a little bit of orange, but it's based in that piney chocolatiness but it's still smooth, right? That a black rye IPA or a Cascadian should have. So we're really excited about this. This uses a little Weyermann chocolate wheat. It obviously uses rye. We're using some Patagonia Black Pearl, which is a super dark malt out of Chile that we're really excited about. So we use a ton of Briess, by the way. Shout out to Chilton, Wisconsin, right there. We like to use like little dips of the UK or German malts and then mix them with some American malts like Rar and Briess. And we're really happy with how this turned out and how it continues to evolve, and the fact that it's available for people to drink at White Sox games is kind of frosting on the cake. So.
Yeah, no, this checks the boxes. You were talking about it. It's complex, accessible. It's like anybody who wouldn't like this style would love this. I think it's a very drinkable beer. It's great. But I want to get back to something Alex referenced earlier about the label. As we've been going through the journey here of your beers, tell us about the labels. Just amazing. Each one looks like a piece of art.
Yeah, so you guys asked about South Loop Brewing Company before. When we started South Loop Brewing Company, we had our first 3 releases. We had labels by 3 different artists. And we felt really excited about the beer that was inside of those packages, but it looked like 3 different breweries. And we had, I don't have cans of it here, but we had done a collaboration with Dry Hop called Milk Stachio, which is a pistachio milk stout. And we had heard of this artist named Dan Jetza, who had done a label for 3 Floyds for Apocalypse Cow. He had done some work for Surly as well. And we just thought, he was kind of that artist, like gritty Chicago artist that we loved his unique approach to everything he did. He does scratch boards, so it's got this awesome texture to it. We kept talking about how it'd be awesome to have a Jetza label for our own, and we reached out to him. He agreed to it. He did Milkstachio, and it looks like this sophisticated Monopoly guy, in a bowler hat, and it was perfect. Like he did that, and he laid it on us, and we were like, oh my god, this is so cool. So
that was the first one?
That was the first time we paid an artist to do art for any of our beers. Then we opened and got licensed, and we used Matthew LaFleur, who did this one, and we used Alexis Molds, who did this one. Right. These are the only two.
The first one you pointed to was the Good Rise Wear Black.
Yep.
And the second one was the World's Colombian Coffee Exposition.
Yep. So both with Chicago ties, both by different artists, but these cans really kind of embody like a life of their own. So even though when we switched to Hop Butcher from South Loop, and we had approached Dan about being our house artist, we still have mad love for these two and the work that they did. So these are literally the only two cans that we do that aren't Dan Jetza's work. Everything else is Dan Jetza and has that look and feel. But every time we come back to Good Rise or World's Colombian, we're using the original art that was done for these beers. So we're lucky to have Dan, as you could see on sometimes, we're like, hey, we're envisioning a can with just scratchboard lettering. Can you make it say Blazed Orange? And, he gives us this. Or other times we're like, you know what? I'm not sure what I'm envisioning Mellotron to be, but like we just kind of envisioned like a teal can, something that felt tropical, and he gives us, what Mellotron turned out. So we really like his own interpretation of some of the names and ingredients that we use. And other times we're like, no, your wish is granted. It's got to be that fortune teller from the movie Big. Like you got to give it to us. And then he gives us that, and he just nails it.
You get that right off.
Yeah. I mean,
cool.
like we have so much. So when you pair that with a long list of hop combinations and a long list of name ideas that we just can't wait to put on a beer, and we're like, you know what? All of a sudden, Amarillo, Simcoe, and Southern Passion or whatever, that's got to be Hopological Insulator or whatever name we haven't used yet. And we're like, hey, Dan, here's the name of the beer. Here's what we're going to do. Like, what do you think? And he spits something out at us that is just always awesome.
He's incredibly talented. I mean, just looking at the artwork that we see here before us, and you guys got to go online and check it out if you don't have anything local. It is truly an amazing set of artwork.
Well, award-winning. He's won some awards for
some
of his beer can labels.
Two Flat, which we don't have on the table, and Milkstachio both won, like USA Today does like a top 10 label around the country type thing, which we were both in the top 10 for those two beers. Dun got a nod from the Beverage Tasting Institute. So like we try to, I mean, the cans are like little pieces of artwork that you can walk around with at a bar or your house. Like, and a lot of people pour it into glass, which is super respectable too, but we try to make some beers that you enjoy drinking out of the can. And if you're at a party and someone's like, hey, that orange can is shiny and looks awesome, what is that? Then the packaging is doing its job too. But I can't stress enough how lucky we are to have Dan on our side, because he's awesome.
It's one of those fun things where the beer industry has gone from the bottle to the can, and now you guys have made the can look sexy. And
you're making me blush, man.
I'm not sure there's a sexier can than that, the World Colombian Exposition.
Yeah,
Can you tell us about this beer?
This is our 10% Imperial Coffee Stout. I think maybe at one point someone might shake their head at canning up a beer this big, but I feel like when we dove into the idea of cans, like it didn't feel right to have a bunch of beers in cans and then switch back to the bottle. And I know a lot of breweries do that. I respect the heck out of that, but it didn't feel like us. So we said, screw it, let's put it in a can.
I think Oscar Blues is on board with you.
Right? And nod to them for paving the way for brewers like us to do that. But the artwork's inspired by a monogram that I saw when we were talking about this name and this idea of using a different Colombian bean and roast every year, and that being the only variable that we switched in and out, but it was always an Imperial Coffee Stout, something that spoke very Chicago-centric to us, as well as relaying that type of information that it was going to be Colombian coffee, and it was going to present whatever that year's bean and roast would be. Just it all kind of came together, and it's obviously inspired by the World's Fair, the World's Colombian Exposition. I'm like, let's just spell Colombian the way Colombians like to spell it, and let's throw coffee in there and see how it goes. So we started digging into the history surrounding that fair, which...
So to paraphrase Alex, that beer's not going to drink itself.
Are you thirsty? I'm sorry. I get sidetracked here. You know, you do a lot of Googling, you look at pictures. The Devil in the White City is an awesome book if you haven't read it, and it's all about that fair, and sadly
H.H.
some murders
Holmes
too, but like it is about that fair.
What's a World Fair without some murder, right?
So we murdered a bunch of coffee beans to make this beer.
Well, they died doing the Lord's work, so...
Holy cow.
We wanted this one to be big and bold. We wanted it to be chewy. We wanted to exhibit that coffee in a very upfront way. We wanted it to have a little bit of like a coffee with cream flavor, so having that chewiness and creaminess kind of all interplay at the same time, but feature the bean, which last year was maybe a little bit more bold. This year we went with a lighter roast, and we added, I think, a little bit more like cherry notes and dark fruit that plays a lot off of the malts that we use in this beer as well. So we're pretty bold with how we add the coffee. It's basically it's a dry hop. It's ground coffee that we steep in the beer, and we recirculate that and carb it with it in there, and then we give it time to relax and settle out. But UK Phoenix brings those molasses notes. HBC 472, which is the experimental hop we were geeking out over before, brings a little bit of the same, those coffee notes, the chocolate notes, but also rumoredly some barrel aging character without the barrel aging. So
that's incredible. That's coming from the hops. That little bit of
the kind of vanilla notes.
Exactly.
I think is what it's kind of replicating there, is that the vanilla notes of the barrel and a little bit of oak flavor.
I'm a believer. Sometimes you don't know if that stuff is mnemonic or not. Like you say, you put strawberry on the can. People think it tastes like strawberry, and some people do. But when I first heard of this hop and I read that, that it exhibited some barrel characteristics and occasionally a little coconut along with that molasses, I was like, we have to use this in a stout. How much of it can I pick up? The fun thing about this beer, like I said, is the variable that we switch the coffee bean. It's always a Colombian bean, but we try to pick a different lot or a different farm, and then we play around with different roasts and try and pick the one we like the most. We will sell the whole bean coffee alongside this beer. So you can buy like a bag of whole bean coffee, and then you could buy the 4-pack and really kind of geek out with us over our pour overs or however you make your coffee. The other thing is that before we brewed the 30 barrels of this that we put in cans, we brewed 15 barrels of the same beer and we put it into barrel, which before you guys leave, we'll show you next door our start to the barrel aging program for Hop Butcher. But we have it in some rye whiskey barrels, we have it in some Buffalo Trace bourbon barrels, and then we bought 2 test barrels, one being peach brandy and one being apple brandy, that we are going to keg up and maybe bring to a fest and see what people think of it. So we definitely want to do more barrel aging, and we feel like, Justin is a big fan of barley wines, and he talked about his previous job where he did some pastry stouts and he did some really nice stouts. We felt like we not only found a brewer who played with that same, hazy, juicy New England style a lot, but he also can help us raise our stout game, our dark beer game. So we felt, hey, we got some cool beers with the pistachio milk stout and this imperial coffee stout, but we feel like we have yet to unlock, that dark beer potential of Hop Butcher that we feel pretty strongly he's going to help us with. So
as we always do, we like to encourage our listeners to interact with the podcast, and if they have a question for us, we have a listener question for you today from Sergio A. His Twitter handle is @Sergio07.
What up, Sergio?
And he asks, what is your favorite beer that you've brewed, and what's your favorite local brewery that you like to go to when you're obviously not drinking Hop Butcher?
Right on. So I'll start with the beer. For favorite one that we brewed here.
Favorite beer that you have brewed.
All right.
That's like asking what's your favorite child.
I know.
You love them all.
I'm gonna give
we all have our favorites.
First of all, thanks for having a question for us. That's cool. I'm gonna answer that with 2 beers, if that's okay. Can I do that?
You know what? You can have twins.
All right. I'm gonna go with Grid. It was a pale ale we did about a year ago that we're about to do now, soonish. We're about to brew it soon. It's actually one of the first beers, right as we were getting into the New England style. One of the things you do to create that haze and those flavors is to hop the beer, to dry hop it when you're fermenting still. It's called biotransformation, and we kind of joke about being practicing biotransformationists. We intended for this beer to be a hoppy pale, but not to be hazy, right? Not to be opaque. So we kept the protein low, and we hopped fermentation anyway, and then we let it clear up, and it just ended up being this like 5.75% ABV Citra and Mosaic hopped dank pale ale. Like we talked about at the beginning of the podcast about like just sitting down and having something low ABV and just like being able to drink 3 or 4 of them and not get, not ruin the next day.
Not getting tweaked.
Right. That was that beer for me. The second answer to that question, knowing that we've been able to play with a lot of fun hops and do some cool stuff recently, we did a collaboration with Miskatonic called The Beer That Should Not Be, and we were able to use Medusa hops for the first time, which the long story behind those hops is that it took me 2.5 years to get some. I had heard about them, and then the long story short, the farmer pulled them out of the ground because the agronomics of this hop were just garbage, and then they were replanting. I'm thinking in my head, like, some brewer somewhere in the country has these in their cooler. Eventually, long story short, we found them, and we were able to use them. They're a Neo-Mexicanus. It's an American wild hop. And the fun thing about these hops is that, certainly the suspense of not being able to get them and finally get them and then being able to use them was that when we rubbed them on brew day, we were super disappointed. Like, we were like this, when you open up your grandma's spice rack over the holidays and you're like, wow, I can't tell if that's pepper or it's like something sweet or like, what is it? Like, it was just very like herbal and spicy. And we were thinking to ourselves, you know what, if it tastes like this and smells like this on the back end, we're going to have to add a lot of Citra and Mosaic to overpower that. 3 days into fermentation, it tasted like a guava bomb. It was just tropical to no end. But it had this flavor that had just blew my mind in ways that I hadn't had a hoppy beer that tasted like that. So the fact that we used it in a New England style, the fact that it was a collaboration with some good friends of ours, but really it was that hop that I'd never experienced what it smelled or tasted like before, and it was just delicious. So that would be my second answer to that question. Justin just joined us. You want to ask him that question too?
Yeah, so Justin, and we should let our listeners know, Jeremiah is cracking the whip on the newest employee and forcing Justin to work during our podcast. Doing the Lord's work, as we like to say, though. But, Justin, the question for you is, do you, even in your short time here, have a favorite beer that you've brewed? And when you're not drinking Hop Butcher for the World, what's your favorite local brewery?
The first part of that question, I have to say that I think my favorite beer that I've been here and been a part of / ever tried from us is the Jules, actually. I'm really digging the way that Vic Secret comes through in that beer. Pairing it with a hop like Mosaic that already has a lot of natural like fruit notes like blueberry, the Vic Secret really shines. I've been in love with Vic Secret ever since I believe either it was Vic Secret or Enigma that's in the Oscar Blues like Blue Dream IPA or whatever. I remember cracking one of those open like 6 months after I had it, and it had been sitting in the fridge, and it still tasted just as fantastic as it did day one, which was kind of blew my mind. And I remember hearing somewhere that it was dry hopped with Vic Secret, and I could be totally wrong on that one, but I just loved like the amount of like grassy strawberry like pininess that came from it. So when I dry hopped the Jules, I unfortunately didn't get to brew it. I wasn't here in time for that one, but I dry hopped it. And I remember going through the process of tasting it and being like, wow, this one's gonna be one that people are really excited about. That perfect blend of strawberry, blueberry, dank, grassy, like pininess, and it has a very unique finish. And when it's warmed up, it just all comes at you like almost like too intensely. I love it. As for when I'm not drinking,
a hop slap in the face.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. I had kind of a warm one in the movie theater the other day, and it was just like, whoa, this is like way more intense than I thought.
He just indict himself on sneaking beer into the movie theater?
It wasn't me. It was someone else. I found it.
Yeah, that's not like a box of Mike and Ike's.
Well, the best part, it was that movie A Quiet Place, right? So I was trying to find a good time to crack the can throughout the movie.
A movie that's almost
spoiler
silent
alert, there
from
is
the
no
beginning.
good time to crack the can. But yeah, no, it worked out pretty well.
You had to do the cough.
Yeah. There's a couple moments in the movie where they have to make a loud sound, so if you can time it right, you can open a can in the theater. I don't know the exact time, so I can't really help anyone out. But
awesome.
Yeah, as for favorite local brewery, Half Acre. That's my jam.
Ditto.
They make one of my favorite beers, the beer formerly known as Sanita, formerly known as Heyoka. I love that beer.
It's gone
when it
away
first
now,
came
right?
out. It's gone away now, yeah. It would be my favorite beer that gets its name changed 3 times. But yeah.
Beers.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it.
I echo Justin on Half Acre. I mean, it's hard to be a lover of hops and like pale ales and IPAs and not just respect the hell out of what they do. But it's also Vallejo time, which is, I think, one of the bombest beers I've ever drank in my life. And I look forward every single year when that beer comes back. It's a beautiful can. It's an even more beautiful beer on the inside. And, yeah, just really good people, too. Like if you go over there and you meet them, whether you're at a festival or you're just walking into their tap room, from the founder on down to the person sweeping their floors. And I can't claim to know everybody there, but everybody I've met from Half Acre has been a top-notch quality person. So we draw a little inspiration from them as well in terms of who we are and what we're brewing and what we hope to be when we grow up and we're the size and age of Half Acre. So.
And for our listeners who are interested, you can go back and listen to episode 7. It was one of our very early episodes. Sitting down with Kelly and Matt from Half Acre, fantastic conversation, fantastic people. We've really enjoyed speaking with you guys as well. Thank you again for inviting us to the brewery and cracking open all these beers.
Thank you guys for making the trip. I know you've made the drive.
Cool. Listen, this has been on our bucket list for a while now, and for you guys to open up your place for us and share your amazing beers with us, we thank you.
Well, thank you. You guys are welcome anytime. We can every Tuesday and Wednesday if you guys want to help can.
We will take you up on that.
We're brewing on the weeks we're not canning, and Justin's not always doing it by himself. So if you want to shovel some grain or you just want to dump some hops into the kettle, you're always welcome to come do that. And based on how we've been kicking out beers, like we'll have some fresh beers for you guys to try as well. But I guess like on a hot take note, I was exchanging some emails with BJ at Bernhardt's.
Okay.
And I know you've talked to BJ as well. I mentioned a couple times
Sounds
that
like we have some breaking news here.
We do have our self-distro license for Wisconsin that we've used, but not consistently. We kick some beer to Discount Liquors. Shout out to Marie. And I've been back and forth with you guys about hopefully doing this someday for a long time. I've been talking back and forth with BJ, and I think we finally got to a point where it's time that we get some kegs up that way, we get some cans up that way, and it might not be the steady stream that our home base sees here, but I think it makes sense, and I think we got some mutual excitement ahead of us. So I guess watch for Bernhardt's and Hot Butcher and Discount Liquor and announcements, because I think we'll be bringing some beer over the border really soon.
Breaking news.
That sounds amazing. And I just moved just south of Bernhardt's, so
nice.
I will be there. I will be
Love
there
that place.
Whatever release there is, I will be.
Yeah, we've got some pretty awesome stuff coming down the pipeline, and we were talking earlier about all the different types of new beers we have coming out. I think this is going to be a month that really showcases a bunch of the newer beers we have coming out. So
it's funny, Craft Beer Week brings out some crazy and some exciting stuff. So we try to showcase what we're all about all in one month, and then really keep cranking from there on out. So.
We're recording in April here, so there's going to be some really fun stuff, and I assume the same with May, same with June. You guys seem to turn over your catalog pretty regularly, and that is fun. As beer drinkers and beer collectors, we are having fun with it. But it looks like we are out of beer for today, for now, until we head back to that bright tank and take some samples. But for me, for today, for Alex,
Jesus,
for Jeremiah,
and Justin,
I'm Jim.
Cheers.
Thanks for having us.
This has been another solid non-fail production.